A federal parliamentary committee has called for major overhaul of the family law system to address the issue of family violence. It's called for swift and urgent improvements to the family law system. Liberal MP member for Corangamite Sarah Henderson joins me now live to discuss all this. Thanks so much for your time.
Ahron, a very good afternoon to you.
Obviously a huge issue. How detailed was this report?
Well, it was very detailed, and we spent many months taking evidence and examining a wide range of earlier inquiries, and we've come to the conclusion that to a large degree the system is broken. Of course, we know how many families suffer or are impacted by family violence around the country. It's an absolute scourge, and our government has already taken so much action to combat family violence. But in the family law space, we've made some very wide-ranging recommendations, Ahron, including the importance of determining family violence early in the proceedings. Too many families are going into the family court system. These allegations are being made, and either children's safety is being compromised because orders are being made which don't really reflect whether family violence has occurred or not. And similarly, there are many people going into the family law courts against whom false allegations of family violence are made, and we're equally concerned about that. So we have called for something like an urgent preliminary hearing to determine whether family violence has actually occurred, rather than waiting 2 or 3 years, as often is the case when a matter gets to trial.
You heard from a number of people who are directly involved. Talk to us about that, because we often hear about system abuses, the high cost of the family law system as well.
Look, absolutely. We actually heard from more than 5,000 people who filled out an anonymous questionnaire, and they told their story. And I want to thank so many people from around the country who had the bravery, the courage to talk about, often with great distress and suffering, grief, to talk about what had occurred to them. Family violence affects families in so many different ways. Often it's very serious physical abuse. Sometimes it's horrific emotional abuse. But whatever form family violence takes, it is affecting families in every street, in every suburb, in every city around Australia. We've made some other very important recommendations, such as the abolition of the presumption of shared equal parental responsibility. If that is established, the courts then have to consider equal time. We think that that's been improperly applied, and the safety of children in particular has been compromised. So if that particular presumption goes, it's not meant to apply in family violence cases, but so often family violence was not being determined early enough in the proceedings. We think that will make a big difference. There's also great complexity. There's enormous cost. Getting into the family court system, whether it's through the family court or the federal circuit court, there are different procedural rules which apply. Now, they've got to be streamlined. Urgent cases must be triaged. And even in property cases, there's got to be greater justice for those who have suffered family violence. So right across the board, we do think that substantial improvements can be made. And I also do want to recognise the Attorney-General has announced a more wide-ranging review of the family law system by the Australian Law Reform Commission, and that will look more broadly at this system. But certainly we've found some major changes that are urgently required.
Over the years, I've spoken to a number of judges, senior judges, who have pretty strong views on this. Sometimes they feel like they cop a lot of blame for this. Did your committee speak to any senior judges? No, we didn't speak directly to judges. Why is that?
I raised the issue of we were going to be hearing from the heads of both the family circuit court, federal circuit court I should say, and the family court. But because of the separation of powers, and I referred this to the Attorney-General, who gave the advice that that would be inappropriate, directly questioning judges in relation to their decisions. But we heard from, frankly, very significantly, Ahron, we heard from many hundreds and thousands of people who had gone through the family law system, many different agencies, advocacy groups, people like Rosemary Batty, Rosie Batty, who had really, of course, we all know Rosie Batty has had a terrible experience, a horrific experience in losing her son Luke. So we heard from many, many people. But what's very important, in fact, we've made reference to this in our report. The new Chief Judge of the Federal Circuit Court has already, I think, quite very quickly decided to make some significant changes in the Federal Circuit Court. So now he's called in a lot of cases for mediation, really tackling the backlog. He's indicated that there will be a different way in which cases will be triaged into the court. And so already I think we are seeing some action in that regard. But there is a terrible backlog. There are terrible costs. There's horrific delays. And we also think that there is some great injustices happening through the family law system that do need to be fixed.
So we talk about urgent improvements. Can you name some things that need to be done now and how quickly that could be followed through?
Well, I think one of the most urgent reforms that needs to occur, and certainly I think the committee was very focused on this, is the need to determine family violence allegations early in proceedings as soon as possible. So if allegations of family violence, Ahron, are made against the perpetrator or the alleged perpetrator, the fact of those allegations needs to be determined very quickly. Because if family violence has occurred and yet interim orders which are made by the court don't reflect the fact that family violence has occurred because it hasn't yet been proven, then there are real issues in relation to the safety of children in particular and also the victims of family violence. We don't think that's good enough. We don't think it's good enough that families should have to wait 2 or 3 years to get to a trial to determine if family violence has occurred. And similarly, many families are being forced to enter into consent agreements which are ratified by the court without actually really being able to prove that family violence has occurred. Now, this is also very, very important for those against whom false or spurious claims of family violence are made. There are many very soul-destroying cases where there have been false allegations made, and if people can have their day in court very early in the piece, that will also, I hope, resolve a lot of those issues as well.
It is an interesting point, though. I know of situations here in Victoria where people have been in family violence situations, called the police, found that the police didn't really know what to do because it was one person's word against another person's word, and then they were told to go towards the courts, and then during that process they were too scared to do so because they were worried about the other person trying to bring dirt on them. It does seem to be a reason that a lot of people end up feel forced to stay in relationships for no other reason than children or the lease or the home ownership or financial reasons, and so therefore nothing happens.
Well, I actually make the point that for many people it's actually very hard to leave a violent relationship. There are all sorts of very complex and difficult reasons, financial pressures, homelessness, relocation. It can also, of course, put people at risk. More than one woman per week on average in Australia this year has died as a result of family violence, and that is a terrible statistic. And it's absolutely horrific in Indigenous communities. But I do have to say, I think the police have really stepped up in the way that they are managing family violence. We didn't directly look at the policing matters because that was beyond the terms of reference. But we have also made a recommendation, Ahron, that there be one or more trial courts, meaning that a state court is able to exercise family law jurisdiction. So if there is family violence, someone can go along perhaps to a specialist domestic violence court, and there are a number of those, particularly in Victoria, and raise not just issues in relation to the need for an AVO or an intervention order, but also raise matters under the Family Law Act, so that the magistrate is exercising federal jurisdiction as well as state or territory jurisdiction. Now, we think obviously magistrates will need more resources and greater training and education in order to exercise federal jurisdiction as well, but we think that has a lot of merit, particularly in areas of high Indigenous populations where, frankly, so many people are falling through the cracks.
Well, how do we talk about that from a national approach compared to a state or territory approach? As you mentioned, for example, Victoria has just had a Royal Commission into family violence. So how does what your committee's recommendations have come up with fit within what has already been out there?
Well, we have built on a lot of very good work, including the Royal Commission in Victoria. The Royal Commission dealt primarily with state-based matters, but we have certainly referenced a number of previous inquiries that have done an excellent job in making these recommendations. Of course, we are concentrating mainly on the federal family law system, not so much on the state-based systems, but we have made a number of recommendations which would, of course, go to the Attorney-General through COAG. That will, for instance, the trial court would require the cooperation of state and territories. We did visit a court in Victoria, and there was a lot of enthusiasm about that, as well as actually bringing in a lot of wraparound services. So other related services, whether it be housing, social services, or financial counselling services. There is great benefit in having all those wraparound services at the one location in the one court, particularly when someone is traumatised, they've gone through a horrific experience, they don't know where to turn. If you can go to one court and get all that support in the one place, we think that's going to make a really big difference. There are some, as I mentioned, specialised family violence courts, and they are doing a terrific job. But if magistrates can exercise family law jurisdiction as well, that will make it so much easier for the person going through what is an horrific experience.
Very much so. Sarah Henderson, we appreciate your time and hope to see some of those recommendations come to fruition. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much, Ahron. Great to talk to you.
You're watching Weekend Live. After the break, our Sky News entertainment reporter sits down with actress Vanessa Kirby for her role in that hit show, The Crown. That's next.
Woke up this morning, I suddenly realized we're all in this together.